What happens when two seasoned business leaders get together? They talk shop, of course. Sit back and listen in as Scott DeLong and Vince Moiso share from their experience around current issues facing executives, entrepreneurs, and their leadership teams. The CEO Podcast starts now.
Hey everybody, Vince Moiso here from the CEO Podcast. I'm here as usual with my friend Scott DeLong, and we are talking today about the most current event. Yeah. And we are experiencing inflation like we haven't in a long, long time. And the way that that's impacting our supply chain. So I don't care what business you're in. I mean, you could be in a service business and you're impacted one way or another, right? From rising costs to, from vendors to material supply to raw material supply to whatever it might be. It's impacting costs, it's impacting cash flow, it's impacting just about every point of a business right now. And so what we wanted to do was have a discussion around, well, how to handle that, because it's creating a lot of anxiety in the workplace. And I don't care if you're in mid-management or your ownership, you are faced with it, right? So whether you're talking internal customers or external customers, there's certain best practices on how to handle this, how to forecast for things, and certainly, I mean, we can talk about the impending recession that's going to happen after this, right?
And for those of you thinking that we're going to get into the cause of the inflation, we're not going to do that. We're staying out of the politics of that or the solution to that inflation. Yeah. But what we're talking about from the business point of view are the real effects of us and what we should be doing about this.
Yeah.
One of the things that I tell people all the time is that these kind of crises are actually opportunities. And I know that sounds like an internal optimist kind of thing, but it forces us to do the type of planning that we should be doing anyway, and many of us don't because we're busy working the day-to-day operations, right?
Or don't do it as frequently.
So there's, in my mind, there's really 4, maybe 5 big issues that run around when you're talking about inflation, and the first one has to do with supply chain, which you had mentioned, right?
Yeah.
So either higher prices, higher freight on that supply.
Freight is crazy.
Slower delivery. Yeah. And we're going to even talk about slower delivery as a technique, as a solution to this as well. So we'll get to there. The second one certainly is cash flow. Right? Cash flow is going to be affected completely. The labor rates, right? The labor rates, because people are busy right now. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things going on in the economy, and they are trying to attract your employees to get them. So your labor rates are going to go up if you want to stay competitive. But even on the other side of that, the cost of living and the effects to your employees, right?
Oh yeah.
If with a 7% inflation rate, if you're not giving people a 7% raise, you're taking money out of their pocket, right? And that's how they feel about it, because that's the reality for them.
No, they do. I mean, that's real. That's already happening.
So then it gets into options on things you can do, and I think there's really 3 that you can look at in the pricing. You can raise the prices, which affect customers, right? You can maintain your price, which affects shareholders, or you can worry about reducing costs. Yeah. And I see a lot of people just making a quick decision. We just need to raise our costs gone up 7%. We got to raise our prices 7%. Yeah. May or may not be the right answer. Yeah. So thinking about how these things play together is what's really important. We've been working on this podcast for a while now, trying to get the sound right and all. I'm not sure we've done that yet. Yeah. But we bought a mixer and you reduce the gain and you raise the output and you change the EQ. It's a matter of playing with all the dials here, not just saying raise prices.
Yeah, it's a good analogy, and we're in the midst of that right now, right? And there's a lot of components, and positioning is one of them, right? Sure. And so I think it's really important. You can't just arbitrarily say, "Hey, I'm going to raise my prices across the board 7%." It doesn't always work. Well, and you have to understand what the market's doing too. So you got to look at competitors.
What are your competitors doing?
Yeah, you got to see, are those prices going up? Am I still going to be competitive on the market? What impact is, are raising prices going to have on the purchase of my product? So, you can't always make just the simple assumption that I raise 7%, I'm going to have that 7% gain that's going to help offset the rising costs. Normally, so like if you're in the distribution or manufacturing, we've got ranges of, just take raw materials for an example. We've got stuff that's gone up upwards of 200%. We've got stuff that's only gone up like 3%, and everything in between. So it's not like we just had, I don't know of any business where this would be true, where you just all of a sudden arbitrarily have 7% cost increase across the board.
So this is where my next point was to analyze. First thing, what I'd like to do is analyze the product mix. Right?
Yeah.
Is to say, and there's a lot of ways of thinking about this. One of them that I was thinking about the other day is there's a technique that folks use when there is a low margin item that just sells, like just sells a ton of it.
Yeah.
Right. And then you got some higher margin items that aren't selling.
Yeah.
Can you, with your customers, start moving them away from the lower price commodity items into the higher price? And one of the things that you can do to turn that knob a little bit is to slow the delivery down on those commodity items.
Yeah.
When they start getting a little bit, you got to be careful with this one, right? But if they get a little desperate, they might go up the next level and get to that next product level that is a higher margin for you.
Well, in addition, so it's a great point that you make when you start to analyze the product mix and your costs over that product mix, right? You're going to identify there might be some items that you can't absorb costs.
Right.
So sometimes that is a trade-off, right? Where you can say, hey, I'm going to just isolate these items because these are the most impacted, right? And that might be the volume in which you do. You say, look, I need to creep these prices up, but I'm going to leave these other products, completely alone. I also, it's not just about product mix. I go very customer centric as well. So, you start to analyze where the volume is really flowing in your revenue. And you identify, hey, there might be 1, 2, or 3, specific customers that make up a high percentage where any type of price increase there is going to make an impact. Whereas if I raise the price over here, there's this perception that's created that might be negative. And it's not really, even if I did and things stayed the same, it's not going to have as big an impact as it is over here. So you really have to look at all components of the business and make a good decision around pricing. Now, you can still do that and have it executed relatively quickly. So I think a lot of people immediately think when we start talking about all this stuff, analysis paralysis, right?
Sure.
Like, wow, I need to make changes now, so how can I do that? Well, okay, great. Sometimes you got to slow down to speed up, right? Where it's like, hey, just take a step back for a second. You've got to look at your product mix. You've got to look at your costs across all products. You got to look at your customer concentration. You got to look at all these things, these components, right? And come up with the right way to position.
There's also another way to increase prices without increasing prices, and that's decreasing the quantity, keeping the price at. I mean, McDonald's has done this for years, right? With their burger used to be a quarter pound or an eighth of a pound for the little tiny one, right?
Right.
I bet it's a sixth of a pound now, so that they can maintain the same price, which is actually a price increase because they decreased the cost on the material. So
so true. So
you can be really creative in that. Now, in your product in the tile business, you can't do that. A square foot's a square foot, and how do you change
you
that?
You can. So there is so when we sell mosaics by the sheet or something like that, so you can start to play with the size or the spacing of a mosaic, things like that. So you can do that. We haven't done that, but we've talked about that and where it makes sense. So as we roll out newer products and things like that, we certainly have considered where we can size differently, where it's like, okay, great, we can keep the price very competitive. We don't sacrifice the look or perception of the product in any way, but it does reduce costs slightly. Even though, our raw material cost has gone up, it keeps that overall cost down. So we're a little more strategic in things like that. So we can actually have.
So there's another point that you just touched on as well. Is something else that you can do is you can start taking a look at the mixture of the product. Is it possible to reduce the quality of the product without reducing the perception of the quality of that product?
There is.
Yeah.
Right. There absolutely is.
So can I, instead of a grade A1, I buy an A2 to keep my costs down, and it materially does not change my product. If you're materially changing the product and the customers are going to say, hey, that's completely different, that's a different story.
Well, we eliminated, perfect example, again, going back to tiles, like we eliminated a raw material component completely. It didn't change the look or quality or functionality or any of it, right? It's just like we were able to remove one raw material component that the costs were, almost 4x. And it was a pain in the butt for us anyway. So we remixed and took that out.
So I cringe when we talk about this. I've never talked about lowering quality before. It's not in my DNA. However,
quality is subjective anyway.
Right? Quality is subjective. However, if you can reduce the types of materials or material completely and not materially affect the product, it's something to take a look at as well.
Yeah, it didn't in any way. It is, and it didn't affect the quality whatsoever.
Yeah.
So
there's other things that you can do with the supply chain as well. Not always, right? You got to check. So
let's talk about freight for a second.
Okay.
So but you brought up supply chain, and I want to talk about freight specifically because freight is about as ridiculous as it gets right now. Like I've never, in my entire career, I've never seen freight. I've never experienced freight like this. Right. There's two things going on. Is that it's almost impossible to keep up. So you got fuel surcharges. Mm-hmm. So the cost of fuel right now is through the roof, right? So you've got the fuel surcharge, and then you've got these what I'd call availability spot prices, right? Right. And so you've got a lot of freight that's just going to the highest bidder at this point.
Pay extra.
And then third is like you've got a shortage of equipment. So it's just hard. So we experience on a weekly basis, literally just a no-show. Drivers a no-show. You've got on the market right now, there aren't enough drivers. There's not enough equipment, and the demand is incredibly high. And then you've got ever increasing fuel costs, which is driving costs upward and upward. Parcel shipment has remained relatively static, like not a huge change, but like full truck, LTL, less than truckload, the pricing for that type of stuff is through the roof right now.
So what can you do about that? So is there a solution? Because I don't see it. I don't see the solution on
there is
with that.
There is.
Other than
you've got to. So here's what happened. It's like so. Let's just step back and think of it in this way. You have vendors for various things. Yep. And oftentimes with companies, we go the path of least resistance. We get stuck with one vendor because it's comfortable, it's easy, prices start to go up.
They've been consistent.
They've been consistent. They're great for you, high level of trust or whatever. Well, when there is a breaking point where you say, I got to rethink this. I can't sustain this. This is no longer sustainable.
Exactly.
So you might be with a small freight forwarder or somebody that just doesn't maximize or doesn't have access to the best rates. And so sometimes it's time to shop. I would tell you, as far as freight goes right now, shop it. I mean, you gotta find there are other freight forwarders. So I can tell you in the last year, that's exactly what I've done. I shopped it to death, and we found an amazing freight forwarder that keeps us very competitive. So there's options. You can go rail. Rail is much less expensive than over the road. That's just an example.
Sure.
And so we found a freight forwarder that really had a foothold in transporting via rail. And so now we've been able to pass those savings on to our customers as a result of that, because it's much less expensive, much more competitive. Less fuel gets used. There's a lot of reasons for it, but might take a little bit more time, a few more days, things like that. So there's things to sacrifice, but in the end, we're saving money and we're saving our clients money. So that's a big deal. But you got to shop it. I mean, for freight right now, now's the time. You gotta check. You might be stuck with a single vendor, and you got to check if they're where you need to be.
Well, I don't think that's anything special to freight. I think that's with all your vendors.
All of them.
Right. And I believe in loyalty, right? I tell my customers, hey, listen, if your current vendor is taking really good care of you and you can afford them, stick with them, right? Loyalty means something. However, the problem is prices just continually go up when
Yeah.
you're not looking,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think shopping makes sense, and being transparent about it. We talked about transparency in an earlier thing. Being transparent with your current vendor. I need to shop this around.
Yeah.
Right. And this crisis in particular provides you that cover with them.
It does.
Right. It's not.
Well, and you may end up in the same place, right, Scott?
Sure.
So you may end up. It may just lead you to, oh, okay, great. This is it. This is what the market is bearing right now, and that's okay. But you still have to check it.
But what I've found when you're shopping vendors, you're getting new ideas as well. Not just an opportunity for a new price or a new a distribution model, but you're getting new ideas from these folks, right?
Yeah.
They're in business for a reason. My vendors, competitors are in business for a reason. They know what they're doing too. Let's find out something from them. So
in my experience with freight forwarders, I would say this especially is that, every freight forwarder has in their networks are all different, and they've got an in somewhere or some way. It might be with drivers, might be with equipment, might be like an example that I gave, might be rail, whatever it is, but a lot of them offer different advantages. And so with freight, especially, I agree with what you were saying, supply chain across the board, you should be checking, but freight, especially, you've got to look rather than just falling into old habits.
So there's some other things. We touched on cash flow a little bit as well. Inflation is going to create higher interest rates. It does, but the interest rates lag the inflation.
Yeah. I
strongly urge you right now to go get those loans, lines of credit secured now.
Get them secured now.
Have the opportunity. Yeah. So when we talk about reducing costs a little bit earlier, we're not necessarily talking about reducing spending.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about reducing costs.
Yeah.
Reducing the spending that you don't need to spend on. But there may be some categories that you do need to spend on. It might be the right opportunity, especially if you can get the loans and the lines of credit. I would say in places like technology, build now. Infrastructure. If you're leasing, is there an opportunity to buy?
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
Thinking about the long term, and this is a good opportunity to do that. And then maybe even higher quantities of materials.
Yeah.
So can I keep the same price if I buy twice as much for you and store and warehouse it?
Great point.
And then all I have to do is figure out the cost of the carrying cost of that. What's the interest going to cost me to do that? And interest rates are still low right now. They're going to go up. So if you can go get yourself a loan, go get yourself a loan.
Well, you talked about spending, so I want to touch on that one in and of itself.
Okay.
Spending for me is something I watch like a hawk in any given situation. So that happens year in, year out. That is just standard. If it's not standard for you, it should become the standard. And especially in a scenario where we've got radical inflation, you got rising costs, this is the time to cut back on spending. Absolutely. And then if it creates a habit, you said that, often these types of times open our eyes to things that we're not doing in the business that we should be doing. One of which is you should be looking at spending and watching spending like a hawk if you aren't.
Well, there's an old thing that happens in many businesses that I've got this budget, and if I don't use it, I lose it. Next year, they won't give it back to me. So people spend on things they don't necessarily need just to get the budget for next year. Well, this is a really good time to stop that.
Stop it.
Just stop that from happening.
Cut that off.
I remember when we were playing ball, we there was game balls that were like $6 a piece, and then there were practice balls that were $5 a piece.
Yeah.
And the junior college that I played for was using I went back to coach then later. They were using the $6 balls for practice, and I said, "Hey, coach, we could save a little bit." And he goes, "No, I can't do that." Why is that? Because if I don't spend everything I have, they won't give it to me next year. So he bought game balls for a practice, right? The university that I played for didn't do that, right? They did game balls and practice balls, right, to save a few bucks. And I think your business ought to take a look at that as well. Are we using game balls when we should be using practice balls?
Yeah, are you budgeting? That's such a great analogy. It's just like, are you budgeting, to maximize spending, or are you budgeting to minimize spending? And I think it's really simple. I'm an absolute budget maniac. I budget. I have a sales budget. I have a travel budget. I have a marketing budget. I have trade show budgets. I mean, you name it. I'm building budgets out because I want everybody on the team to know and understand what we're capable of spending, what we should be spending, and to everybody be a steward of what we're spending and why we're spending it. Because I look at it as this, Scott, and if this can slap somebody in the face, I hope it does. We often use the term opportunity cost, right? Mm-hmm. The reality is when you think of it as actual spending, that's more metaphorical, but when you think of it in actual spending, I put it to my team this way, said, great, hey, I don't mind spending that extra $2,000, but that's $2,000 we can't spend over here if we decide to do that. Right. And I said, to be honest with you, I'd rather take that $2,000, put it in your guys' pocket so you can, get a gift card for a customer when they give us a big order or whatever that might be. I said, where do you think the dollars are better spent?
Highest, the best value.
Right? Like, where's the best value? And so I always put it out like that. Whereas I've been with organizations, I've coached organizations that just spend for the sake of spending. And man, that's not me. And I don't even want to be a part of an organization like that.
Well, so for those organizations, this is a good time to take a look at it right now.
It is.
You can't just keep spending 7% more than you spent last year on useless stuff.
Cannot.
Right?
Yeah, cannot.
So there's a lot there. So here's another opportunity. We talked about crisis to be an opportunity. Everybody's expecting price increases right now as well. They are. So this is a good opportunity for those underpriced items that you've had, those commodity items that you used to have and thought that there was nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
To get them up.
Now's the time.
To get them up. Absolutely.
It is. And that's even if, so it's such an interesting point you bring up, because you might be listening to all this and going, hey, I'm not really getting impacted the same way that others are getting impacted. Okay, well, it is an opportunity either way where, hey, you might have said, you know what, but I think I'm under market and I've been under market for a while. It's a great opportunity for you to bring those costs up, and everyone's expecting it, and you can bring it up to market. Now, all I would say is what we said earlier, which is check the competition, check the market. You should always price to market. Don't price off of cost or anything else, price to market. You should be competitive there. So as you check into that, it is a great opportunity. I'm going to shift gears on you just for a little bit, because I don't want to run out of time without covering, because there's a ton of stuff we can talk about. We had a previous podcast where we talked about the labor market, and we talked about how hard it is to hire right now, and we touched a little bit on that podcast about labor rates. And we said, hey, what's happening right now is you've got signing bonuses, massive signing bonuses. You've got 25% to 50% higher than market rates for those positions, and there is there's a negative impact to that we're going to see when we get into recession. I think this probably hits home for a lot of people, because when I talk to a lot of people in business owners, I talk to people that I'm coaching, and they're talking about the challenges of finding talent and actually getting them to their businesses.
Yeah. Well, I think even more important than that, maybe not more important, but as important as that is the retaining the talent that you have.
No question.
Because that's my real concern.
I think it's more important.
I think getting great talent's great, but it's how long does it take to get them up to speed?
Yeah, sure.
These people are productive already. We can't afford to let them go.
No.
And we also can't afford to let them put a gun to our head either, right? And just make huge demands. So that's a dance that you've got to play with, folks. And again, those that haven't gotten raised just took a 7% decrease in their earnings. Yeah. So you got to put that into consideration. I mean,
that's real.
Right? Yeah, it's real. It's real to them.
Well, and if you can preempt or proact, right? So, I mean, I think if there's an action item for anyone listening to take away, so whether you're in management or you're a business owner, especially those very, very key to the business that maybe are due for a merit increase or, whatever that might be, I would say jump on it as quickly as you possibly can. Grab those people, go through that process. If you're not doing, annual or quarterly or semi-annual performance evaluations, get those done, get those in the book. Now's a great time to get that done and talk about, hey, company's in a position, we'd like to give you,
I think even if you do annual, and you have an annual thing and it's not supposed to come up,
still got to jump on it
right now, because the recruiters are out there recruiting your folks and offering them more.
They are.
So let's give you an example. So if I've got a happy employee and somebody offers them 20% more pay, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
They're going to jump.
Yeah.
Like most likely they're going to jump.
Yeah.
But if they're offering, if I've already offered them 12% increase, and they get offered a 20, they're not going anywhere.
Right.
But if I offer that only after they've made a demand,
doesn't work.
That lessens my power with them, right?
Yeah.
So being proactive in this, hey, we're in a position now. We appreciate the work. We want to make sure you're happy.
Yeah.
Inflation's at 7. I want to give you 12. Whatever the numbers are that you're going to work out with them, right? If you can do that before the recruiter gets to them, you're going to save some money.
Yeah.
Because if they offer them 20, you're going to have to match them. That's just the way the life works. But if you offer 12 before they offer 20, you're probably going to keep that person.
Quick anecdote. I love what you just said, and I completely agree with it. I'll give you a quick anecdote. So, I had my short stint at University of Notre Dame, and I'm working, with the football team. And at the time, there was this quarterback that was there that decided to leave. He went on to Cincinnati, but at the time, he made an announcement that he was going to put his name into the transfer portal. And so I went to the coach and I said, hey, what do you do in that situation? I mean, he was a really good quarterback. Like he was, he could have fought for the starting job, but decided to jump ship. And he said, you know what? It never works to try to convince. Once that person's made that decision and's got the foot out the door, he goes, you know what? I just let the process happen because it never works out to try to get that person back because now you've got you're resetting on a completely different relationship.
Power dynamics change.
And he said that the power dynamic changes. And this is the other component he said. He says that's really, and it'll be temporary because he's still going to end up leaving.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow. So I walked away from that. I took that, obviously that was in a sports setting. I took it to the business level, and that was a lesson learned at that point. That's 9 years ago at this point, almost a decade ago. And I've put that into practice where, I've had employees that have decided to move on. I just celebrate it. Great. I'm so happy for you that you've got this opportunity. And they've already made that decision in their mind. So their body has already shifted. Yeah. And so it's too little too late. Yep. The analogy that you gave was great. They got the 20%. And now you go, hey, what if I raised, gave you the same raise and I matched that? Would you be willing to stay? Reality is that's only going to be temporary.
Well, because they know that's not a tactic that will work and they will continue to look for those opportunities.
Yeah. Power dynamic completely shifts.
Sure. So, but as you were talking, I'm thinking about just the opposite of that. Is you take care of the people before they start looking.
Do it before.
Then they don't start looking.
To your point,
right?
Yeah.
It just makes that point solid. Happy people don't leave.
They don't.
Right.
Well, and to your point, you could have given them the 12% and they would have been happy, and they get the 20% offer and they're just going to say no to it because they'd much rather stay.
Yeah.
Especially if they're happy in their position.
The old saying, I take care of those that take care of me.
Yeah.
Well, it works in reverse as well.
You got
people that I take care of will take care of me too.
Yeah.
It works both ways. So, and again, nothing's 100% solution, right? There's can tell you all these things, and then some situation's going to come up, and someone's going to just leave because they left.
Well, let's drive the message home here because what we're talking about. There's a lot, right? We could go on and on. So we tried to just really focus in on some of the major issues like supply chain, cost, price increases, and how to deal with all of these things. Look, you're faced with it today. That means you got to do something about it. And I know companies that haven't done anything about it, right? And you might fall into that boat. You got to start today. So we talked about some very specific things. I'm gonna run down if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Supply chain. We talked about across all your vendors, you got to start vetting out, potential other vendors. For those that the scenarios that matter, it might be a raw material, might be a service, might be freight, might be whatever it is. There might be certain ones that are just fine. And
prioritize the ones that are most important.
Prioritize it, right? Yeah. But you got to check it, right? You got to keep that stuff in check, and there's nothing wrong with finding alternatives that might save you a little bit of money, right?
And there's benefits even if you stay with your current. You're going to get smarter in the process.
Yeah. No question. And we talked about cash flow. We focused, or at least I focused on spending. And I think, now's as good a time as any to really double check that spending and reduce it as much as possible, because you've got raising costs, right? You got costs that are coming up. And if you haven't done anything on the pricing side yet, then look, you should immediately be cutting spending as much as you possibly can.
And getting those lines of credit secured.
Yeah, get that secured. The rates are there.
I mean, you may not need the money, but it's nicer to have there than not have there.
Well, and interest rates are only going up, right?
Yeah.
Well, and then we talked about labor, right? And I think this could arguably be one of the most critical. And I agree with you. I started to mention about the way that the labor market is, but reality is we're talking about labor rates with your current employees,
right.
And you got to proact. You got to really jump on that right now with critical employees and making sure that they're taken care of, they're happy, and no one's leaving. We also talked about pricing and pricing strategies. And I think if you're not looking at everything, analyzing the product mix appropriately, analyzing your customer concentration, right. Really looking at those costs, pricing the market accordingly.
And maybe even challenging your customers' needs in that process.
Absolutely.
Right? Challenge them. Is this really what you need based on what you want, or can we work something else?
I have those front end conversations. It's a great point that you bring up, and we didn't talk about that earlier. But yeah, I have those front end conversations, and I just say, hey, look, here's the situation that we're in. I've got these rising costs. I can do a fuel surcharge with you. I could do a couple ways and get their input, get their buy-in before you even make the change. So it's a great way to do it. Did I cover everything for the most part?
I think we're good. The answer is there's not one size fits all.
No, not at all.
It takes a detailed analysis of competitors, customers, vendors, pricing, cash flow. I'm going to go, there was one piece you missed. If you're going to spend on things that matter.
Oh, yeah.
Technology,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
How's technology going to save me? If I'm getting this loan, how am I going to spend it on some technology that's going to save me down the line a little bit?
Yeah.
Not immediately, but down the line a little bit. Infrastructure potentially, maybe new equipment, those sorts of things, and do it while the cash is cheap. So,
well, the biggest takeaway is act and act now. I mean, there's real urgency in taking action. So if you haven't done anything, you got to do it. You got to do it now. And I like what you said too, is to prioritize. I mean, you said it in the in about supply chain specifically, but I think across the board, what are the issues that you're faced with, whether it's pricing or supply chain or cash flow, employees, whatever that is, but prioritize what needs to get done and then act now.
That's it.
Yeah.
And don't act on impulse. Really dig into the underlying issues and where we can either save or make. Right. Yeah. So that was pretty fun. Unfortunately, dealing with inflation, but not a great subject to have fun with.
I don't love it. It's not my favorite subject, but I wanted to address it, and I wanted to hopefully present some action items for any of the listeners.
Yeah, that's a better way. I was about to say solutions, but I don't think they're always solutions, but there's certainly action items that can help maintain, because you don't want to hurt customers, you don't want to hurt shareholders, you don't want to hurt employees.
Yeah.
And how do you twist those dials?
Yeah.
A little bit here and a little bit there, in order to keep the company rolling along.
Agree.
All right.
Well, as always, we appreciate your feedback. You can reach out to us. You can go to leadtogoals.com, right? Or check out the CEOpodcast.net. You can always check us out on YouTube. Just search the CEO Podcast. And of course, across any of the podcast channels, you can listen in. We appreciate everybody listening. And until next time, cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for joining us for the CEO Podcast. Please visit us at theceopodcast.net, where you can learn more about our co-hosts and listen to past episodes. If you would like to have a discussion and dive deeper into any topic, there is also an option to contact Scott or Vince to schedule some time with them. Thanks for listening.